The sound of crystal hitting marble echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot, sharp, final. The kind of sound that makes everyone's breath catch in their throat, even if they're 3 tables away. Inside the Halstead Grand Ballroom, the most exclusive charity gala in Manhattan, every conversation died mid-sentence. Victoria Halstead's hand, dripping with emeralds that cost more than most people's houses, had just sent a champagne flute sailing across the floor. It shattered 6 inches from Aaliyah Monroe's feet. The shards scattered like tiny diamonds across the polished marble. The champagne spread in a golden puddle that reflected the light from the chandeliers overhead. 200 of New York's wealthiest elite froze exactly where they stood. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Glasses paused in midair. Phone screens went dark as people looked up from their feeds. All of this, all of it, because Victoria Halstead was pointing one manicured finger at the waitress in the crisp white blouse and black slacks, and the words coming out of her mouth cut sharper than any knife. "Clean it up. On your knees, where you belong." The jazz quartet in the corner stopped playing. Even they knew something terrible was happening. But here's what nobody in that room expected. Aaliyah Monroe didn't drop her tray. She didn't apologize. She didn't rush to grab a towel or fall to her knees like some scared servant. Instead, she set her tray down on the nearest table, slow, deliberate, like she had all the time in the world. Her dark eyes met Victoria's without flinching, without looking away, without giving an inch. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Halstead?" Aaliyah asked. Her voice was calm, measured, the kind of voice that made you wonder if maybe you were the one in the wrong here. Victoria's face went red, bright red, the kind of red that happens when someone isn't used to being questioned, especially not by the help. "You know exactly what the problem is," she hissed, loud enough for half the room to hear. "My necklace, my $2 million diamond necklace. It was on my table 15 minutes ago, and now it's gone, and you were the only one who came near it." The room got even quieter somehow. Over by the bar, a man in a perfectly tailored black suit lowered his glass of whiskey. Kang Min-jae hadn't moved from his position all night, not once. The ghost, they called him, the man who controlled half of Manhattan's underground economy without ever raising his voice. His face was always the same, cold, expressionless, unreadable as stone. But right now, something changed. His eyes, dark as midnight, locked onto the woman in the white blouse standing in the center of that ballroom, and for the first time in years, his jaw tightened. "Now listen, I'm about to take you somewhere you didn't see coming. We're talking power, betrayal, a secret marriage that could topple empires, and a billionaire's wife who just made the worst mistake of her life. But real quick, before we go any further, if you're new here and this is your first time watching, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now, drop a like on this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because I want to know who's riding with me on this journey. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. All right, let me show you how this whole thing started. The Halstead Gala wasn't just another party, it was the party, the kind of event that got written about in society pages for months afterward, the kind of night where a single invitation could change your entire life. It took place in a ballroom that looked like it belonged in a European palace. 30-foot ceilings with hand-painted frescoes, crystal chandeliers imported from France, marble columns that had been carved by artisans who learned their craft from their great-grandfathers. The champagne was vintage Dom Perignon. The caviar was flown in from Russia that morning. The string quartet had performed at Carnegie Hall last week. But the Halstead Gala wasn't famous for its decorations or its menu. It was famous for who showed up. CEOs worth billions, politicians who decided where tax money went, investors who could make or break companies with a single phone call. This was where the real power of New York City gathered, where deals got made in whispered conversations by the windows, where alliances got formed over plates of filet mignon, where futures got decided while jazz music played softly in the background. And somewhere in the middle of all that wealth and power, wearing a simple white blouse that somehow looked more expensive than half the designer gowns in the room, was Aaliyah Monroe. 29 years old, born and raised in Chicago, the kind of woman who moved through the world like she belonged anywhere she stood. She carried herself with a grace that made people look twice, wondering if maybe they should know her name. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek bun that showed off the elegant line of her neck and jaw. Her posture was perfect. Her movements were efficient, but never rushed. She looked like she could have been sitting at any of those tables as a guest instead of serving them. Aaliyah had been working at these elite Manhattan events for 8 months, ever since she'd quietly slipped into the city with nothing but a suitcase and a desperate need to disappear. She never told anyone why she left her old life behind, never explained the sadness that sometimes flickered across her face when she thought nobody was looking, never mentioned the reason she flinched whenever a door slammed too loud, or why she always positioned herself near the exits. She just worked, head down, smile professional, never drawing attention to herself. That was the whole point. Blend in, be invisible, survive. But tonight was different. Tonight, she was exhausted. The gala was short 2 servers who'd called in sick, which meant Aaliyah was covering twice as many tables as usual. She'd been on her feet for 6 hours straight. Her lower back ached. Her calves burned. The smile she kept plastered on her face was starting to feel like a mask that weighed 10 pounds. And then Victoria Halstead's champagne glass hit the floor, and everything Aaliyah had been running from was about to catch up with her in the worst way possible. Victoria didn't wait for an answer. She didn't need one. In her world, accusations were the same as convictions, especially when you were talking to someone who served drinks for a living. She took 3 steps forward, her emerald gown sweeping across the floor like she was some kind of queen approaching her throne. The crowd parted without anyone even thinking about it. That's what wealth does. It creates space where there wasn't any before. "Search her," Victoria said, and she said it loud enough that the whole ballroom could hear. "Check her pockets, check her apron. That necklace didn't just vanish into thin air, and she's the only one who had access to my table." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People started whispering behind their hands, their eyes darting between Victoria and Aaliyah like they were watching a tennis match. Some of them looked uncomfortable, like they knew this was wrong but didn't want to get involved. Others looked hungry, eager for drama, for scandal, for something to talk about tomorrow over brunch. 2 security guards materialized from the edges of the ballroom, big men in dark suits with earpieces and blank expressions. They'd been standing there all night, invisible until they were needed. Now they moved toward Aaliyah with the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," the first guard said. His voice was polite but firm, the kind of tone that wasn't really asking. Aaliyah didn't move. She stood there in the middle of that ballroom, surrounded by 200 people who were all staring at her, waiting to see if she'd cry or beg or protest her innocence. The smart thing would have been to just go quietly, let them search her, prove she didn't have anything, and move on with her night. That's what anyone else would have done. But Aaliyah Monroe wasn't anyone else. "I didn't take your necklace, Mrs. Halstead," she said, and her voice carried across the room clear as a bell, not loud, not angry, just certain, like she was stating a fact that couldn't be argued with, like saying the sky is blue or water is wet. Victoria's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Of course you didn't. They never do they? It's always someone else, always a misunderstanding." She turned to address the crowd, playing to her audience now. "You give these people opportunities, you let them into our world, and this is how they repay us, with lies and theft." The guards were closer now. one on each side of Alea, close enough that she could smell their cologne, could see the way their hands hovered near her arms, ready to grab if she tried to run. "Ma'am, last chance," the second guard said. "Either you come quietly or we'll have to escort you out by force. Your choice." The room held its breath. Even the people who'd gone back to pretending they weren't watching were watching now. This was the moment where Alea Monroe would either break or bend, where she'd learn her place in the hierarchy of Manhattan's elite. Except, nobody in that room knew the truth. Nobody knew who she really was. Nobody knew about the ring. Alea raised her right hand, slow, deliberate, palm facing outward like she was taking an oath or stopping traffic, and the room saw it. The ring sat on her fourth finger, heavy and unmistakable, platinum, thick as a man's thumb, with an engraving so deep and detailed you could see it from 10 feet away. A dragon coiled around a lotus flower, its scales etched with precision that only came from master craftsmen who'd spent their entire lives perfecting their art. And in the center, rising above everything else, was a crest, the Kang family crest. The first guard stopped mid-reach. His hand froze in the air like somebody had pressed pause on him. His eyes locked onto that ring, and all the color drained from his face. The second guard saw it a heartbeat later, and he actually took a step backward. Not a small step either, a full step, like he'd just realized he was standing next to a live bomb. The silence in the ballroom changed. It wasn't the shocked silence from before, when Victoria had made her accusation. This was different, heavier. The kind of silence that happens when everyone in the room suddenly understands they've been watching the wrong person this whole time. Someone near the back gasped, then someone else. Then the whispers started, spreading through the crowd like wildfire, jumping from tree to tree. People were pulling out their phones now, not to record, but to text, to call, to warn whoever needed warning that something impossible had just happened at the Housted Gala. Because everybody who mattered in New York knew about that ring. Everybody knew what it meant. There were only 3 of them in existence, 3 platinum signet rings bearing the Kang family crest. One belonged to Kang Min-jae himself, the ghost, the man who controlled more money and power than most small countries. One belonged to his younger brother, currently running operations in Seoul. And the third ring was supposed to be locked away in a vault somewhere, waiting for the day Min-jae took a wife. Except here it was, on the hand of a waitress in a white blouse, standing in the middle of Victoria Halstead's ballroom. Victoria's smug expression cracked, just a little at first, like ice starting to break on a frozen lake. Her eyes went from Alea's face to her hand, to that ring that caught the light from the chandeliers and seemed to glow with its own cold fire. That's not, she started, but the words died in her throat. "You were saying something about theft, Mrs. Halstead," Alea asked. Her voice was still calm, still steady, but now there was something else underneath it, something that made it clear she wasn't asking permission anymore. She was reminding Victoria of exactly where they both stood on the food chain, about me taking something that didn't belong to me. The guards had backed up a full 3 steps now. Their hands were raised like Alea was the one who might hurt them, not the other way around. One of them was whispering frantically into his earpiece, probably calling for instructions from someone way above his pay grade. Across the ballroom, near the bar where he'd been standing perfectly still all night, Kang Min-jae set down his glass. The sound of crystal touching wood was soft, but somehow everyone heard it. He straightened his tie, buttoned his suit jacket, and started walking toward the center of the room, toward his wife. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. People stumbled over their own feet trying to get out of his way fast enough. Some of them bowed their heads slightly as he passed, an instinctive gesture of respect, or maybe fear. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody dared. This was the ghost, the man whose name you didn't say out loud unless you wanted to attract the wrong kind of attention. Min Jae moved like he owned every inch of that ballroom, which, in a way, he did. His suit was black, perfectly tailored, the kind of craftsmanship that cost more than most people's cars. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His hair was styled back, not a strand out of place. But it was his face that made people look away. Cold, empty, like looking into the eyes of a statue that somehow learned to walk. He didn't glance at Victoria Halstead as he passed her, didn't acknowledge the guards who'd gone rigid with terror, didn't spare a single look for Thomas Halstead, the billionaire tech mogul who was suddenly realizing that his wife had just insulted someone far more dangerous than he'd ever be. Min Jae had eyes for only one person. Aaliyah watched him approach, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, something flickered across her face. Not fear, not relief, something complicated, something that looked like resignation mixed with a sadness so deep it made your chest hurt just seeing it. This was the moment she'd been avoiding for 8 months, the moment her hiding ended, the moment her two worlds collided in front of 200 witnesses. Min Jae stopped directly in front of her. 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, radiating the kind of power that didn't need to be loud or flashy, it just was. For 3 seconds, they stood there looking at each other, and the entire ballroom held its breath waiting to see what would happen next. Then Min Jae reached for her hand, the one with the ring. He lifted it gently, like he was handling something precious and fragile, even though everyone in that room knew Aaliyah Monroe was neither of those things. He brought her knuckles to his lips and kissed the ring, not her skin, the ring itself. A gesture that meant something specific in his world, something about ownership and protection and promises made in blood. Jagiya, he said, and his voice was low, quiet, meant only for her but carrying across the silent room anyway. The Korean word for darling, for beloved. You should have called me. Aaliyah's jaw tightened. I was handling it. I can see that. His eyes finally left hers, scanning the ballroom, taking in the guards, the scattered crowd, Victoria Halstead standing there with her mouth hanging open like a fish drowning in air. When his gaze landed on Victoria, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Who, he asked, still speaking softly, still holding Aaliyah's hand, put their hands on my wife? Nobody answered. Nobody moved. The security guards looked like they were trying to melt into the marble floor. Victoria had gone pale, all that confident color draining from her face like someone pulled a plug. And Thomas Halstead, the man whose name was on the building, whose company was worth $12 billion according to last quarter's reports, took a step forward with his hands raised like he was approaching a wild animal. Mr. Kang, he said, and his voice cracked just a little. I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. If we could just... Your wife, Min Jae interrupted, and he said it so quietly that people in the back had to strain to hear, accused mine of theft in front of 200 witnesses. She demanded she be searched. She called her... He paused, like he was tasting the words and finding them disgusting. Where she belongs, on her knees. Thomas shot a look at Victoria that could have melted steel. His jaw worked like he was grinding his teeth into powder. Victoria, what did you do? But Min Jae wasn't interested in marital disputes. He finally released Aaliyah's hand and turned to face Thomas fully, giving him his complete attention for the first time. Halstead Technologies, he said, like he was reading from a grocery list. $12.3 billion valuation. 72% of your funding comes from venture capital firms. Venture Point Capital holds your largest stake at 18%. Summit Bridge Ventures holds another 15%. Kensington Group holds 12%. Thomas's face went from pale to gray. How do you... I own Venture Point Capital, Min Jae continued, still in that same calm conversational tone. My brother owns Summit Bridge, and Kensington Group, he tilted his head slightly. I acquired that 3 months ago. Funny how these things work out. The math was brutal and simple. Min Jae controlled 45% of Halstead Technologies' funding. With a phone call, maybe two, he could pull every dollar and watch the whole company collapse like a house of cards in a windstorm. By morning, Min Jae said, your board will receive notice that all three firms are withdrawing their capital. Your stock will be worthless by noon. Your employees will be looking for new jobs by the end of the week. Your name will be a cautionary tale that people tell their children about what happens when you forget your place. Please, Thomas said, and the word came out strangled. Please, my wife made a mistake, a terrible mistake. We'll apologize, publicly. We'll make donations. Well, your wife, Min Jae said, humiliated mine. She demanded she kneel. She called her a thief. He buttoned his suit jacket again, a gesture that somehow felt more threatening than if he'd pulled out a weapon. So now you'll understand what it feels like to kneel, to beg, to have everything taken from you while people watch and do nothing. He turned back to Aaliyah, offering her his arm like they were at some pleasant garden party, instead of in the middle of destroying a man's entire life. Shall we go home, Jagia? Aaliyah looked at Thomas Halstead, at Victoria standing there trembling, at the crowd of Manhattan's elite who'd just learned exactly who she was. Then she slipped her hand through Min Jae's arm. Yes, she said quietly, let's go home. They didn't go home, not to the penthouse on the Upper East Side with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, not to the townhouse in Brooklyn Heights that Min Jae had bought under 3 different shell companies. They went to the safe house in Tribeca, the one nobody knew about except Min Jae's most trusted people, the one with reinforced walls and a panic room, and enough security cameras to monitor a small city. The car ride was silent. Min Jae's driver knew better than to make conversation. Aaliyah stared out the window, watching Manhattan blur past in streaks of light and shadow. The ring felt heavy on her finger, heavier than it ever had before. The safe house was a loft, industrial and cold, all exposed brick and concrete floors. Min Jae unlocked 3 separate deadbolts before the door swung open. He stepped inside first, checking the space the way he always did, scanning for threats that probably weren't there but might be. Then he held the door open for Aaliyah. She walked past him without a word, dropped her small purse on the kitchen counter, kicked off her shoes, and waited. 8 months, Min Jae said finally. He closed the door, locked it, stood there with his back against it like he was blocking her only exit. 8 months, Aaliyah. You left our home, left everything I built to protect you, to work minimum wage serving champagne to people who treat you like you're invisible. I wanted to be invisible, she said. Her voice was tired, so tired. That was the whole point. The point? Min Jae's calm cracked just a little, not much, but enough that you could hear the anger underneath. The point of putting yourself in danger, of refusing security, refusing my protection, refusing to even tell me where you were living. I wasn't in danger. I was in a ballroom serving hors d'oeuvres. You were exposed. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, and suddenly he was right there in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Tonight proved that. Someone knew who you were. Someone told Victoria Halstead to target you. This wasn't random, Aaliyah. This was planned. That stopped her. The exhaustion, the frustration, all of it paused as his words sank in. What are you talking about? Victoria Halstead is an entitled fool, but she's not stupid enough to accuse the wife of Kang Min Jae of theft without reason. His hand came up, fingers brushing the side of her face with a gentleness that didn't match the steel in his voice. Someone fed her information. Someone wanted to draw you out, and it worked. Aaliyah closed her eyes. I just wanted to feel normal, just for a little while. Her voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. I wanted to go to work, come home, watch television, eat takeout. I wanted to be Aaliyah Monroe, waitress, not Aaliyah Kang, the ghost's wife. I wanted one last chance to be ordinary before I disappeared into your worlds completely. You were never ordinary, Min Jae said quietly. That's why I married you. She opened her eyes, met his gaze. And that's why I left. The words hung between them, heavy with 8 months of distance and choices that couldn't be taken back. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere in the city. Inside, the silence stretched until it hurt. Min-jae pulled away first. He walked to the windows, hands in his pockets, staring out at the Tribeca skyline like the answer to everything was written somewhere in those lights. Aaliyah watched his shoulders, the rigid line of his spine, the way he held himself like a man trying to solve a puzzle that might kill him if he got it wrong. "Only 7 people knew about our marriage," he said finally. His voice was different now, not angry, analytical. The tone he used when he was working through a problem, turning it over in his mind from every angle. "My brother and soul, my attorney, my financial advisor, 3 of my security team, and us." Aaliyah wrapped her arms around herself. The loft was cold, or maybe she was cold. Hard to tell anymore. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Victoria Halstead shouldn't have known you existed." He turned to face her, and his expression was the one that made people afraid of him. Empty, clinical, like he was looking at a chessboard instead of a room. "We were married in a private ceremony. No guests, no photographs. The paperwork was filed under aliases in 3 different jurisdictions. Your ring never leaves your finger, and you've been careful not to wear it where anyone could see." "I wore it tonight," Aaliyah said quietly. "You wore it under a glove for 6 hours. You only took the glove off when you raised your hand to stop those guards." Min-jae crossed the room to the kitchen counter, pulled out his phone. His fingers moved across the screen, fast and precise. "Victoria accused you of theft 30 minutes into your shift, before you removed the glove, before anyone could have seen the ring." The pieces were falling into place, and Aaliyah felt her stomach drop as she understood what he was telling her. "She knew who I was before tonight." "She knew exactly who you were." Min-jae's jaw tightened. "She knew you'd be working that gala. She knew you were my wife, and she knew that if she pushed hard enough, if she humiliated you publicly enough, you'd have no choice but to reveal yourself." He looked up from his phone, and for the first time since they'd left the ballroom, she saw something other than anger in his eyes. She saw fear. "Someone used her to flush you out. Someone in my inner circle sold you to my enemies." Aaliyah felt the floor shift under her feet. 8 months of hiding, 8 months of building a quiet, normal life where nobody knew her name or her history or the man she'd married. All of it burned down in one night because someone close to Min-jae had betrayed them both. "Who?" she asked. "Who would do this?" "That's what we're going to find out." Min-jae pocketed his phone. "But whoever it is, they made one critical mistake. They assumed you were a weakness, a liability, something I'd protect at the cost of everything else." His eyes locked onto hers. "They don't know you like I do. They don't know what you're capable of." Aaliyah straightened her spine, lifted her chin. The exhausted waitress from an hour ago was gone, replaced by the woman Min-jae had married, the one who'd survived things that would have broken most people. "What do you need me to do?" Min-jae made 3 phone calls. 20 minutes later, his entire inner circle was standing in the loft, all 7 of them. His brother had flown in from Seoul last week for business and hadn't left yet. The attorney looked annoyed at being pulled from his bed at midnight. The financial advisor was still in his suit from some dinner meeting. And the 3 security team members stood in a line near the door, faces blank, posture military straight. Nobody spoke. They all knew better. When the ghost summoned you at midnight, you showed up and you kept your mouth shut until he told you otherwise. Min-jae stood in the center of the room with his hands clasped behind his back. "One of you," he said, voice carrying across the space like a blade, "gave information about my wife to Victoria Halstead. One of you told her where Aaliyah would be tonight. One of you is the reason my wife was publicly humiliated and nearly arrested." The room got very still. The kind of still that happens when everyone is trying very hard not to breathe too loud, not to blink wrong, not to do anything that might draw attention. "I will give you one opportunity to confess," Min-jae continued. "If you do, your death will be quick. If I have to find you myself, it won't be." Silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Aaliyah watched them from her position near the kitchen. She'd been watching them since they arrived, the way she'd spent 8 months watching people, noticing things. The small details that most people missed because they were too busy looking at the big picture. "It was him," she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. Min-jae's brother frowned. The attorney looked confused, but the security team, all 3 of them, went rigid. Aaliyah pointed at the man on the left, Park Ji-hoon, head of Min-jae's personal security detail, the one who'd been with him the longest, nearly 6 years. He was at the gala tonight. Park's face stayed blank. "I was on duty, Mrs. Kang. Mr. Kang's security team always attends events where he's present." "You were," Aaliyah agreed. She stepped forward, and something in the way she moved made Park take a half step back. "But you weren't in your usual position. You were near the service entrance, by the kitchen, where the waitstaff came and went." She tilted her head, studying him. "And you were wearing cologne." "Cologne?" The attorney looked between them, lost. "Security doesn't wear cologne on duty," Aaliyah explained. "It's too distinctive, too easy to track, too easy to remember. But tonight, Park was wearing something expensive, something I smelled 3 times during my shift. Once when I first arrived and passed him by the service entrance, once when Victoria Halstead walked past me and I caught it on her dress, and once more about 10 minutes before she accused me when a man in a suit brushed against my shoulder in the hallway." Park's blank expression finally cracked. Just a little, just enough. "You needed to get close to her," Aaliyah continued, "to confirm I was the right target, to make sure she understood exactly what to do and when to do it. So you broke protocol. You wore cologne so she'd recognize you in a crowded room, and you didn't think anyone would notice." Min-jae looked at Park with eyes colder than a January morning. But someone did. The other 2 security guards moved without being told. They grabbed Park by both arms, lifted him slightly so his feet barely touched the ground. He didn't fight, didn't struggle. There was no point. Everyone in that room knew what happened to traitors in Min-jae's organization. Fighting just made it last longer. "Take him to the warehouse," Min-jae said. "I'll deal with him after I get answers." "Wait," Aaliyah's voice cut through the room. Everyone froze. Not the warehouse, the boardroom. Min-jae turned to look at her, one eyebrow raised. "The boardroom?" "He's not some street-level operative," Aaliyah said. She was still watching Park, studying him the way a scientist studies something under a microscope. "He's been with you for 6 years. He knows everything. Every safe house, every contact, every operation. If you take him to the warehouse, whoever hired him will assume he's dead and go underground. But if you take him to the boardroom, in your office building, in public, where people can see..." She let the sentence hang. Understanding flickered across Min-jae's face. "They'll think we're negotiating." "They'll think Park is trying to make a deal," Aaliyah corrected, "and they'll panic. People make mistakes when they panic." 20 minutes later, they were 53 floors above Manhattan in Min-jae's private boardroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, making everything below look small and insignificant. The table was black glass, polished to a mirror shine. The chairs were leather, expensive, the kind corporate executives sat in while deciding the fate of thousands of employees. But tonight, only 3 chairs were occupied. Park sat at one end of the table, hands zip-tied in front of him. Min-jae sat at the other end, perfectly still, perfectly silent, radiating the kind of authority that didn't need words. And Aaliyah stood between them, not sitting, choosing to remain on her feet. She was still in her white blouse and black slacks from the gala, but somehow she looked like she belonged in that boardroom more than Park ever did. "Who hired you?" she asked. Her voice was calm, almost conversational, like they were discussing the weather instead of treason and murder. Park said nothing. His jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed on the table. "Was it the Choi Syndicate?" Aaliyah walked slowly around the table, her footsteps soft against the carpet. They'd been trying to move into Manhattan for years. Or maybe the Russians? They'd pay well for information about Min Jae's operations. Still nothing. Aaliyah stopped directly behind Park's chair, leaned down until her mouth was close to his ear. "You're going to die tonight," she said quietly. "That part is already decided. The only question is whether you die as a traitor or as a man who tried to fix his mistake. So I'll ask you one more time. Who hired you?" Park's hands trembled, just slightly, but enough. "The Choi family," he whispered. "They promised me $2 million in safe passage to Singapore. They said all I had to do was identify you, prove you existed. They never said they'd use Victoria Halstead to publicly humiliate you. I didn't know. You knew enough," Min Jae said. His voice came from the other end of the table, soft as silk and sharp as broken glass. "You knew enough." Aaliyah straightened, walked back around the table until she stood beside Min Jae, her hand resting on the back of his chair. The three of them formed a tableau, frozen in that boardroom high above Manhattan. Park, broken and trembling, Min Jae, cold and inevitable, and Aaliyah, calm and certain, the dragon's consort who'd just proven she was far more dangerous than anyone gave her credit for. 3 months later, Aaliyah Monroe sat in a different boardroom, same building, different floor. This one was hers, decorated in shades of cream and gold, with art on the walls that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. The nameplate on her desk read, "Aaliyah Kong, Director of Operations," and the 20 executives sitting around her conference table treated that nameplate like gospel. She was wearing Dior today, a charcoal gray suit that probably cost what she used to make in 3 months of waitressing. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves past her shoulders. The platinum ring caught the light every time she gestured. Impossible to miss, impossible to ignore. Nobody would ever mistake her for a waitress again. "The Choi family has made 3 attempts to negotiate," she said, looking down at the report in front of her. "All 3 times they've offered territorial concessions in exchange for peace. I've declined." One of the executives, a man in his 50s who'd been with the Kang organization for 15 years, shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Kang, with respect, perhaps we should consider their offer. The conflict is costing us resources and nothing," Aaliyah interrupted, her voice pleasant but absolute. "They tried to use me as leverage against my husband. They paid a traitor to expose me. They orchestrated a public humiliation designed to force Min Jae into a position of weakness." She looked up, met the executive's eyes. "Do you really think I'm interested in peace with people who did that?" The room went silent. Nobody argued, nobody dared. Aaliyah stood, walking to the windows that overlooked Manhattan. Somewhere down there, the Halstead Gala venue sat empty. Thomas Halstead's company had dissolved exactly as Min Jae promised. Victoria had filed for divorce 2 weeks later, and the story of what happened that night had spread through New York's elite like wildfire. A cautionary tale about the cost of underestimating the wrong person. "The Kang syndicate doesn't just survive on fear," Aaliyah continued, speaking to her reflection in the glass. "It survives on precision, on knowing who our enemies are and eliminating them before they can eliminate us. The Choi family thought I was Min Jae's weakness. They're about to learn I'm his greatest strength." She turned back to face the room. "By the end of this quarter, we will have absorbed 3 of their front companies, recruited half their mid-level operators, and cut off their supply lines from Seoul. Not through violence, not through intimidation, through strategy, through patience, through being smarter than they are." One of the younger executives, a woman who'd only been with the organization for 6 months, raised her hand tentatively. "And if they retaliate?" Aaliyah smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind that made people remember exactly who she'd married and what that meant. "Then they'll learn the same lesson Victoria Halstead learned, that the most dangerous person in any room isn't always the one everyone's looking at." She returned to her seat, crossed her legs, and opened the next file. Now, let's discuss the Singapore expansion. I have some thoughts about our shipping routes. The meeting continued. The executives took notes, and somewhere in a penthouse 50 floors above them, Kang Min-jae sat at his own desk and smiled, because his wife had finally stopped hiding, and Manhattan was about to find out what happened when the dragon's consort decided to stop serving champagne and start ruling an empire.